Chapter 1. The Beast Punishment. You'll learn your place among the creatures where you belong. The words cut through Luna like shattered glass, each syllable designed to strip away whatever dignity she had left. Councilman Thorne's voice dripped with the kind of satisfaction that came from watching someone fall exactly as far as you intended them to. Luna felt the words settle into her bones, heavy and familiar. She had heard variations of this cruelty her entire life, had learned to let them wash over her like rain on stone. That had always been enough. Keep her head down, endure, survive another day in a world that had decided she was worth nothing. The iron grip on her arms belonged to two guards who had dragged her from the kitchens where she had been scrubbing pots in the pre-dawn darkness. Her crime had been looking up, simply raising her eyes when Councilman Thorne had walked past, instead of keeping them fixed on the grimy water and leftover scraps that were her constant companions. In the rigid hierarchy of the Shadow Moon Pack, even a glance from someone like her was considered insolence. The massive stone steps leading down to the beast arena stretched before them like the descent into some ancient underworld. Each footstep echoed against the damp walls, the sound bouncing back distorted and hollow. The air grew thicker as they descended, heavy with the scent of wild things and old blood. Luna's wolf, buried so deep she sometimes forgot it existed, stirred restlessly for the first time in months. "The Alpha King himself will be watching this morning," Thorne continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a special treat. "He enjoys watching justice served to those who forget their station. Perhaps seeing you torn apart will remind the other servants what happens when they grow too bold." Luna said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had spent 23 years being told she was nothing, being treated as less than, and she had learned that fighting back only made the punishment worse. The beast arena was reserved for the worst criminals, the ones who had committed crimes against the pack structure itself. Murderers, traitors, and now apparently kitchen servants who had dared to look up. The final door loomed before them, ancient oak reinforced with iron bands. Beyond it lay the arena where captured magical beasts were kept for the entertainment of the pack elite. Shadow wolves whose eyes glowed like stars, fire drakes that could melt steel with their breath, iron bears whose claws could shred a wolf in seconds. Luna had heard the stories whispered in the servants' quarters, tales of criminals thrown to the beasts as the crowd cheered above. The door opened with a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself. The arena spread before her like a vision from her worst nightmares. It was massive, carved from living rock deep beneath the pack compound. Torches flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the space feel alive and hungry. The floor was covered in sand that had been stained dark by years of violence, and everywhere, in cages both great and small, the beasts waited. A shadow wolf the size of a small horse lifted its head as they entered, eyes like molten silver fixing on Luna with an intelligence that made her breath catch. In the cage beside it, a fire drake stretched wings that glowed ember red in the torchlight. The iron bear in the corner cage stood nearly 8 feet tall, even on 4 legs, its metallic fur catching the light like armour. "The beauty of this punishment," Thorne said, genuine pleasure warming his voice, "is that it serves multiple purposes: entertainment for our betters, justice for your insolence, and disposal of someone who never should have survived past childhood anyway." They dragged her to the centre of the arena, where a smaller cage waited. Not the cramped holding cells that lined the walls, but an open circle of iron bars that would give the beasts room to circle her, to play with their prey before finishing what everyone expected to be a very brief hunt. Luna's hands shook as they shoved her inside and locked the gate behind her, not from fear, though that lived in her chest like a cold stone. The trembling came from something else, something that felt almost like recognition. Her wolf was no longer stirring restlessly. It was awake, more awake than it had been since she was a child. "The Alpha King should arrive within the hour," Thorne informed the guards. "Make sure someone goes to wake the others. They'll want to witness this." And then they were gone, leaving Luna alone with the beasts. The silence stretched like a held breath. Luna sat in the centre of her cage, legs folded beneath her, and waited for death to find her. Around the arena, the creatures watched. The shadow wolf had not taken its silver gaze from her face. The fire drake's wings rustled with each breath. The iron bear had moved to the front of its cage, massive paws resting against the bars. This was where she would die. This was how the world would rid itself of Luna Ashworth, the servant girl who had never quite learned to be invisible enough. She found, to her surprise, that she was not angry about it. Anger required hope, and she had given that up years ago. The shadow wolf whined, a sound so soft she almost missed it. Luna looked up, meeting those ancient silver eyes, and felt something she had not experienced since childhood. The wolf was not looking at her with hunger or hatred. It was looking at her with something that might have been longing. She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing, being treated as less than. But what if they had all been wrong? The thought came unbidden, dangerous and impossible. Luna pushed it away and settled back against the cold iron bars to wait for morning, surrounded by beasts who, for reasons she could not understand, had not stopped staring at her since the moment she arrived. Above them all, dawn was beginning to break, and with it would come the Alpha King and the entertainment he expected to find. Luna closed her eyes and tried to remember the last time she had felt truly safe, truly wanted, truly seen. She could not remember such a time. But something deep in her bones whispered that perhaps, in this place of death and wildness, she was about to discover what she had been looking for her entire life without knowing she was searching for it at all. Chapter 10. The Battle. Unleashed. The attack came at midnight, when the moon hung like a silver coin in the star-scattered sky, and most of the compound slept in uneasy dreams. But Luna had not been sleeping. She had been standing at the edge of the arena, surrounded by her court of ancient guardians, feeling the approach of armed enemies through the network of wild creatures that now served as her eyes and ears across the entire territory. "They're coming from 3 directions," she said quietly, her voice carrying easily to where Kieran stood beside her. His own senses stretched to their limits as he prepared for the battle that would determine their fate. 50 fighters, maybe more. They mean to end this before we can consolidate our power. Through the mate bond, Luna felt Kieran's grim satisfaction at the confirmation of what they had both expected. The rebels had moved faster than anticipated, unwilling to give Luna more time to gather her supernatural forces or for word of her abilities to spread beyond the compound. "Seraphina?" he asked, though they both already knew the answer. "Leading the charge," Luna confirmed, her enhanced senses picking up the scent of expensive perfume and barely controlled fury even at this distance. "She's not content to let politics handle this. She wants to remove me personally." Around them, the beasts began to stir, with the restless energy of predators scenting blood on the wind. Night Whisper's silver eyes began to glow with supernatural light, his massive form radiating lethal intent. The fire drake's scales shimmered as heat built in its chest, preparing flames that could melt steel. The iron bear rose to its full, intimidating height, metallic claws extended and ready for war. But they were not alone. Over the past hours, as word of Luna's awakening had spread through the wild networks that connected every creature in the territory, an army had gathered in the shadows around the compound. Wolves from the northern forests, their eyes glowing amber in the darkness. Great cats that moved like liquid shadow, paws silent on stone. Bears whose roars could shake the earth itself. Eagles and hawks circling overhead, ready to dive with talons extended. All of them had come to defend their queen. "The old bloodlines call to them," Luna murmured, feeling the weight of ancient responsibility settle around her shoulders like a mantle made of starlight and duty. They remember the oaths their ancestors swore to mine, the bonds that were forged in the first days of our kind. Kieran's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing in a grip that felt like an anchor in the storm that was about to break over them. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, though Luna could feel through their bond that he already knew her answer. "I've been ready my entire life," she replied, power beginning to build in her veins like electricity before a lightning strike. "I just didn't know it until now." The first explosion came from the compound's eastern wall, stone and mortar flying in deadly shrapnel as shaped charges breached the ancient barriers. Immediately, alarms began to wail throughout the complex, the sound harsh and urgent in the midnight air. But Luna had already felt the attack through her network of watchers, had already begun to respond with a power that dwarfed anything the rebels could bring against her. She raised her hand, and every wild creature within miles felt her summons like a song in their blood. They came from every direction at once, a tide of fur and fang and claw that poured through the compound with the unstoppable force of nature itself. Not as mindless beasts seeking destruction, but as a coordinated army following their queen's silent commands. The rebels had expected to face a handful of guards and perhaps some trained pack members. They were not prepared for the fury of the wild made manifest. Luna felt the moment when her power fully awakened, triggered by the mortal danger to herself and her mate. Pain lanced through every bone in her body as they elongated and reformed, as her spine stretched and her face pushed forward into something that was both human and wolf and something entirely other. She heard herself scream, but the sound came out as a howl that echoed across the compound like the voice of every queen who had ever ruled, harmonized into one primal song of power and rage. When the transformation completed, Luna stood before her enemies not as the servant girl they had dismissed, but as the true queen of the wild, her form radiating golden light that made the midnight air shimmer like heat waves. Her wolf was not separate from her humanity, but merged with it, creating something new and terrible and beautiful beyond description. Kieran's own transformation was equally magnificent, his alpha form growing larger and more powerful in response to his mate's awakening. But where Luna glowed with golden light, Kieran radiated the storm-grey power of a king who had never known defeat, and together they were a force that could reshape the world itself. The battle was joined with vicious intensity as rebels poured through the breaches in the compound walls, silver weapons gleaming in the moonlight as they sought to cut down the queen before she could fully claim her power. But Luna was no longer the helpless girl who had once cowered in kitchen corners. She moved through the chaos like lightning given form, her hybrid shape allowing her to fight with both human intelligence and wolf instincts. Night Whisper flanked her right side, his massive jaws crushing the throat of anyone who came too close to his queen. The fire drake soared overhead, breathing flames that turned rebel weapons to molten slag before they could strike their targets. The iron bear carved through enemy lines like a living avalanche, its metallic claws leaving destruction in their wake. But it was not just the arena beasts who fought for Luna. Every wild creature that had answered her call became part of the battle, striking from shadows and high places with coordinated precision that spoke of a hive mind guided by royal will. Eagles dove with talons extended, targeting eyes and exposed throats. Wolves harried the flanks of the attacking force, their pack tactics honed by millennia of evolution. Bears smashed through enemy formations like living battering rams, their roars shaking the very foundations of the compound. "She's controlling them all!" one of the rebels screamed, his voice cracking with terror as he watched a coordinated assault by creatures that should have been fighting each other instead of working together. "Every beast in the territory answers to her!" Luna heard the words through the chaos of battle and felt fierce pride flare in her chest. This was what it meant to be a true queen, not someone who ruled through fear or domination, but someone who inspired loyalty through love and understanding. Every creature that fought for her did so willingly, joyfully, because they recognized in her the fulfillment of ancient promises and the return of the sacred bonds that had once united all living things. Seraphina appeared through the smoke and chaos, her platinum hair dishevelled and her expensive clothes torn by her desperate flight through the compound. She carried a silver blade that gleamed with poisonous intent, and her pale blue eyes held the kind of desperation that made even cornered rats dangerous. "You think you've won?" she snarled, raising the weapon as she faced Luna across a courtyard littered with the debris of battle. "You're still just a servant pretending to be important, and when I kill you, your pet beasts will scatter like the mindless animals they truly are." Luna felt Kieran's protective fury flare through the mate bond, felt his desire to step between her and the threat. But this was her battle, her chance to prove that queens did not hide behind their kings when challenges arose. "You understand nothing," Luna said, her voice carrying easily over the sounds of combat as she faced the woman who had tried to steal her mate and destroy her future. "This was never about servants or nobles, never about bloodlines or politics. This is about the fundamental truth that love creates stronger bonds than fear, that unity builds more lasting power than domination." Seraphina lunged with a speed born of desperation and supernatural enhancement, her silver blade seeking Luna's heart with deadly precision. But Luna was no longer bound by human limitations, no longer constrained by the carefully maintained weaknesses that had hidden her true nature. She moved like liquid starlight, faster than thought, her hybrid form allowing her to dodge the killing strike while her own claws found their mark. Seraphina's scream echoed across the compound as Luna's power flowed through her, not to kill, but to bind, to prevent any further threat to the bonds that had finally been allowed to flourish. Around them, the battle was turning decisively in favour of the defenders. The rebel forces, demoralised by their leader's defeat and overwhelmed by enemies they had never expected to face, began to retreat toward the breaches they had created. Some threw down their weapons in surrender, recognising the futility of fighting an enemy that commanded the loyalty of every wild thing in the territory. But Luna was not finished. Power continued to build in her transformed body, reaching out through the network of connections that bound her to every creature that had answered her call. She could feel their joy at her victory, their readiness to pursue the retreating enemies and end the threat permanently. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice carrying to every corner of the compound and beyond, reaching the minds of every beast that fought in her name. "Let them go. They are defeated, not destroyed. There has been enough blood tonight." The wild army obeyed instantly, pulling back from their pursuit with disciplined precision that would have impressed any military commander. They had proven their point, demonstrated the futility of opposing their queen through violence. There was no need for wholesale slaughter when mercy would serve better. Kieran appeared at Luna's side as her transformation began to reverse, his own form shifting back to human as the immediate danger passed. His storm-grey eyes held pride and love and fierce possessiveness as he looked at the woman who had just proven herself worthy of every crown ever forged. "You magnificent, terrifying, perfect creature," he murmured, pulling her against his chest as the golden light faded from her skin. "You just reshaped our entire world." Luna collapsed against him, exhausted by the full awakening of her power, but exhilarated by what they had accomplished together. Around them, the wild creatures that had fought for her began to disperse, returning to their forests and mountains and hunting grounds with the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and loyalty rewarded. The rebellion was over. The Queen had come home. And as dawn began to break over the compound, painting the sky in shades of victory and new beginnings, Luna knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer pretending to be less than she was. She was Queen Luna Moon Whisper, ruler of the wild spaces, guardian of the ancient bonds, and mate to the Alpha King who had chosen love over politics and truth over convenience. The real work of building their new world was just beginning. Chapter 11. The New Order. Morning arrived with cruel efficiency, but this time it brought not the harsh light of judgment, but the golden glow of victory and new beginnings. Luna stood on the balcony that overlooked the compound's main courtyard, watching as the last of the debris from the night's battle was cleared away by pack members who moved with the careful respect of subjects acknowledging their new queen. 3 weeks had passed since the rebellion's defeat, 3 weeks of careful negotiation and delicate power restructuring as the Shadow Moon Pack adapted to the reality of their transformed world. It had not been easy. Generations of rigid hierarchy and traditional power structures did not change overnight, even when faced with the undeniable evidence of Luna's supernatural authority. But change they had, one careful step at a time. The first formal recognition had come from Elder Blackwood himself, the aged politician's survival instincts finally overriding his initial resistance. He had approached Luna in the aftermath of the battle, his weathered face creased with the kind of exhaustion that came from watching everything you thought you knew crumble into dust. "Your Majesty," he had said, the title falling awkwardly from lips that had never spoken it to anyone but Kieran. "The Council formally requests your guidance in restructuring our alliances with the neighbouring territories." Luna had felt the weight of that moment settle around her shoulders like a crown made of responsibility and hope. Not just the acknowledgement of her power, but the acceptance of her authority to wield it in service of her people. Now, standing in the morning light with Night Whisper's warm presence at her side, Luna reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The great shadow wolf rarely left her vicinity, serving as both companion and symbol of the new order that placed supernatural bonds on equal footing with traditional pack hierarchies. Other beasts had chosen to remain as well. A small contingent of the fire drakes now roosted in specially constructed areas atop the compound's towers, while several of the iron bears had claimed territory in the northern courtyards where they could serve as both guardians and living reminders of Luna's authority. "The morning reports, Your Majesty," Beta Marcus said from behind her, his voice carrying a respect that had been hard-earned through weeks of watching Luna prove her fitness to rule. He had been one of the hardest to convince, his loyalty to traditional pack structure running deeper than most. But even he had been forced to acknowledge that Luna's methods produced results that exceeded anything they had achieved through conventional means. Luna turned from the balcony railing, accepting the leather portfolio that contained updates from across their territory. The network of communication she had established through her connection to the wild creatures had revolutionized their intelligence gathering, providing real-time information about everything from weather patterns to the movements of potential threats. "The Northern Territories have requested a formal meeting," Marcus continued, his tone carefully neutral as he delivered what they both knew was significant news. "Lord Commander Ravencrest wants to discuss new treaty terms, given the changed circumstances." Luna felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. Lord Commander Ravencrest was Seraphina's father, the man who had spent 3 years negotiating the alliance that his daughter's actions had destroyed. His request for new discussions was as close to a formal surrender as proud men like him were capable of offering. "And the other territories?" she asked, settling into the chair that had been placed on the balcony for these morning briefings. It was not a throne, not yet, but it served the same function, a place where the Queen of the Wild could hold court with the sky above her and her guardians beside her. "Mixed responses," Marcus admitted. "Some are eager to establish relations with a queen who commands such unique resources. Others are still deciding whether to treat this as an opportunity or a threat." Luna nodded, having expected as much. Her victory had sent shockwaves through the supernatural community, forcing every pack and territory to re-evaluate their understanding of power and authority. Some would adapt quickly, recognizing the advantages of alliance with someone who could provide intelligence and support from every wild creature in their territory. Others would resist, clinging to old ways until circumstances forced them to evolve or be left behind. Schedule the meeting with Lord Ravencrest for next week, she decided, and send word to the other territories that Queen Luna Moonwhisper is prepared to discuss mutually beneficial relationships with any who approach in good faith. Marcus bowed his head in acknowledgement, but Luna could sense his continued amazement at how naturally she had adapted to the responsibilities of leadership. She supposed it should have been more difficult, the transition from servant to queen, but the truth was that ruling felt as natural as breathing when you had the right motivation. And Luna's motivation was currently approaching from the direction of the training grounds, his presence a warm pulse through the mate bond that connected them across any distance. Kieran appeared in the doorway that led from the interior chambers to the balcony, his dark hair still damp with sweat from his morning sparring session, and his storm-grey eyes holding the kind of contentment that had become his default expression since their bond completed. He had thrown himself into the work of restructuring their military and political systems with the enthusiasm of someone who finally had a partner worthy of sharing the burden of leadership. "Good morning, my queen," he said, the formal address softened by the warm affection in his voice as he crossed to where she sat. "Good morning, my king," Luna replied, reaching up to take his hand as he bent to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. The simple contact sent warmth racing through both their bodies, the mate bond humming with contentment at their proximity. Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically, though Luna noticed the small smile he tried to hide at their obvious devotion to each other. "Should I return later for the remainder of the briefing?" "Stay," Kieran said, settling into the chair beside Luna's with the easy grace of someone comfortable sharing power. "We have an announcement to make that will affect the entire pack." Luna felt her heart skip a beat as anticipation flared through the mate bond. They had discussed this privately over the past few days, but hearing Kieran voice it aloud made it real in a way that set her pulse racing. "The formal mating ceremony will take place in 2 weeks," Kieran continued, his eyes never leaving Luna's face as he spoke. "Not a political arrangement or diplomatic necessity, but a true bonding between mates who choose each other above all other considerations." Marcus's eyebrows rose with surprised pleasure. "Your Majesty, that's wonderful news. The pack has been hoping for exactly this kind of announcement." Luna squeezed Kieran's hand, feeling the truth of those words through the network of connections that now linked her to every member of their extended family. The pack had initially been terrified of her power, confused by the changes she represented. But as the weeks passed and they saw how that power was used, to protect rather than dominate, to unite rather than divide, fear had gradually transformed into acceptance and then into genuine affection. "There's more," Luna said, her own voice soft with wonder at what they were about to share. "The ceremony will not just formalize our bond, it will establish the new structure of our leadership, the partnership between the traditional pack hierarchy and the ancient authority of the Wild Queens." "A dual monarchy," Kieran added, his voice warm with pride as he looked at the woman who had transformed not just his world, but his understanding of what leadership could be. 2 rulers working in harmony, each bringing their own strengths and perspectives to guide our people into a future that honours both innovation and tradition. Marcus nodded slowly, his political mind already working through the implications and opportunities such an arrangement would create. "The other territories will take notice. A formally recognised partnership between an Alpha King and a Beast Queen will reshape diplomatic relationships across the continent." "Let them take notice," Luna said, rising from her chair as power began to build in her veins like electricity before a storm. "Let them see what becomes possible when old wounds are healed and ancient bonds are restored. We're not just creating a new form of government, we're proving that unity creates stronger foundations than dominance ever could." As if summoned by her words, a great golden eagle landed on the balcony railing, its fierce eyes fixed on Luna with the devotion of a subject greeting their beloved ruler. Behind it, other wild visitors began to appear, a red fox that slipped through the doorway like liquid shadow, a great horned owl that settled on the roof's edge with silent grace, a young wolf that approached with cautious reverence to press its muzzle against Luna's outstretched hand. "They come to offer congratulations," Luna said softly, her heart swelling with emotion as she felt the joy radiating from every creature that had chosen to acknowledge her authority. "They understand what this ceremony means, not just for us, but for the restoration of the ancient accords between civilization and wilderness." Kieran stood beside her, his own hand reaching out to touch the eagle's wing in a gesture that would have been unthinkable before their bond completed. The great bird allowed the contact, recognizing in the Alpha King someone worthy of its queen's love and therefore deserving of its own respect. 2 weeks, Kieran said, making it sound like both a promise and a prayer. "And then the world will see what we've built together." Luna leaned against his side, feeling the solid warmth of him anchor her, even as her power reached out to touch every living thing within miles of their territory. Through her network of connections, she could sense the excitement building among both their pack members and the wild creatures who served as her court. Preparations were already beginning, not just for the ceremony itself, but for the celebration that would follow, a festival that would bring together wolves and ravens, humans and beasts, all united in recognition of the bonds that made them stronger together than they could ever be apart. "The new order isn't just about us," she murmured, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had found their true purpose. "It's about proving that love creates more lasting change than fear, that partnerships built on mutual respect can weather any storm." As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the balcony in shades of gold and promise, Luna stood surrounded by the man who completed her and the creatures who had chosen her, feeling destiny settle around them like a crown made of starlight and hope. The old world had ended the night she was thrown to the beasts. The new one was about to be formally consecrated in bonds that would reshape everything they thought they knew about power, authority, and what it truly meant to rule with wisdom rather than force. And Luna could hardly wait to see what wonders they would create together in the years to come. Chapter 12. The Dawn of Queens. 3 months after the mating ceremony that had joined the Alpha King and the Beast Queen in bonds that would reshape their world forever, Luna stood in the memorial garden that had once been the Beast Arena, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly that carried the future of 2 bloodlines. The transformation of the underground space had been her first official act as queen, turning the place of her imprisonment into a sanctuary of remembrance and hope, where iron cages had once held captive creatures. Flowering vines now climbed graceful trellises that reached towards skylights cut into the stone ceiling. Where sand had been stained dark with blood, soft grass grew in patterns that formed the ancient symbols of unity between the civilized and the wild. "You're thinking too hard again," Kieran's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and gentle teasing, as he approached through the garden paths. "I can feel it through the bond." Luna smiled, turning to face the man who had become not just her mate, but her perfect partner in the delicate work of building a new world. The ceremony 3 months ago had been everything they could have hoped for, a celebration that brought together pack members and wild creatures, traditional customs and ancient rituals, all unified in recognition of the love that had transformed both their lives. "I was remembering," she said softly, her free hand reaching out to take his as he joined her beside the memorial fountain that marked the exact spot where her cage had once stood. "Thinking about the girl who sat in that cage, convinced she was nothing, worth nothing, destined for nothing but a painful death." Kieran's storm-grey eyes grew fierce with protective love as he lifted their joined hands to press a kiss against her palm. That girl was always a queen. She just needed the right circumstances to remember who she was meant to be. Luna felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The mate bond between them hummed with contentment, a golden thread of connection that had grown stronger with each passing day, each shared decision, each moment of unity in the face of challenges. "The Northern Territories have agreed to the new trade agreements," she said, settling onto the stone bench that faced the fountain where water danced in patterns that caught the afternoon sunlight. "And the Eastern Pacts want to send delegations to study our integration methods." "Our methods," Kieran repeated with satisfaction, settling beside her with one arm sliding around her shoulders in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I like the sound of that." It was true. The partnership they had forged between traditional pack authority and ancient beast wisdom had exceeded every expectation, creating a form of governance that was both more effective and more compassionate than anything either system had achieved alone. Kieran's strategic mind and political experience, combined with Luna's supernatural connections and intuitive understanding of natural harmony, to create solutions that serve both practical needs and deeper spiritual purposes. "The pregnancy is progressing beautifully," Luna continued, her voice soft with wonder as she felt the small flutter of movement from the life growing within her. "The healers say the child carries both bloodlines strongly, traditional wolf traits enhanced by the ancient queen legacy." Kieran's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on her belly, his touch gentle as he communicated silently with the heir who would inherit both their kingdoms. "Boy or girl?" "Does it matter?" Luna asked, though she could feel his curiosity through their bond. "Either way, they'll be raised to understand that true power comes from connection, not domination, from service, not selfishness." A soft chittering sound drew their attention to the garden entrance, where a family of young foxes had appeared, their bright eyes fixed on Luna with the devotion that had become commonplace among the wild creatures of their territory. Behind them came a great owl, its wings silent as it settled on a low branch to watch over their royal audience. "Your court is growing," Kieran observed with amusement, watching as more creatures began to appear from the hidden paths and shadowy corners of the garden. "Every day brings new additions." Luna felt her heart swell with affection for the beings who had chosen to make their home near hers, wild things that had found safety and purpose in service to the Queen who understood their ancient languages. "They feel the change coming," she said softly. "Not just the baby, but the shift in the world itself. The old barriers between civilized and wild are falling, and they want to be part of what rises to replace them." As if summoned by her words, Night Whisper appeared at the garden's far entrance, his massive shadow wolf form moving with the dignity of a royal counsellor approaching his queen. Behind him walked a younger wolf, smaller and more cautious, whose silver-tipped fur marked her as one of the new generation, born since Luna's awakening. "Night Whisper has been training the young ones," Luna said, watching with pride as her first and most faithful guardian approached with his protégé in tow. "Teaching them the old protocols, the proper ways to serve and protect a queen of their choosing." The great wolf pressed his muzzle against Luna's outstretched hand, his ancient eyes warm with satisfaction as he felt the life stirring within her. Through their mental connection, she felt his joy at the knowledge that the bloodline would continue, that the bonds forged in starlight and sealed with love would extend into future generations. "Queen Heart," his voice whispered in her mind, "the young one wishes to pledge her service to the heir, as I pledged mine to you." Luna looked at the smaller wolf, seeing in her bright eyes the same recognition and devotion that had first drawn Night Whisper to her side. "What is her name?" "Dawn Whisper," came the reply, tinged with affectionate pride. "Born under the rising sun on the morning after your victory, marked by the light of new beginnings." "Dawn Whisper," Luna repeated aloud, extending her hand toward the young wolf who approached with reverent caution. Will you guard my child as faithfully as Night Whisper has guarded me?" The response was immediate and absolute, the young wolf pressing her head against Luna's palm in a gesture of complete submission and unwavering loyalty. Through the touch, Luna felt the oath being sworn, ancient words that bound Guardian to protect it in bonds stronger than blood or law. "She accepts," Luna said softly, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the continuation of traditions that stretched back to the first queens. "The next generation will have its own protector, its own guide into the mysteries of the wild." Kieran squeezed her hand gently, his own emotions flowing through their bond as he watched his mate ensure their child's future would be protected by forces older and more reliable than any human institution. "Our daughter will never doubt her worth," he said with fierce certainty. "She'll grow up knowing exactly who she is and what she's capable of." "Daughter?" Luna asked, raising an eyebrow at his certainty. Kieran's smile was soft with paternal pride and prophetic knowledge. "I can feel her through the bond, strong-willed like her mother, protective like her father, and carrying magic that will make yours look like a candle compared to wildfire." Luna felt her breath catch as she contemplated what that might mean for the world their child would inherit. A daughter who carried both the ancient queen bloodline and the strength of the most powerful alpha in generations, raised in an environment where supernatural abilities were nurtured rather than suppressed, where love created the foundation for power rather than fear. "The world isn't ready for what she'll become," Luna murmured, but there was no fear in her voice, only anticipation. "Then we'll make it ready," Kieran replied, with the confidence of a king who had already reshaped one impossible situation and was prepared to do it again as many times as necessary. "We'll build her a world where queens are celebrated instead of hidden, where power serves love instead of replacing it." As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the memorial garden in shades of gold and amber, Luna sat surrounded by her mate, her guardians, and the growing family of creatures who had chosen to make their lives part of hers. The weight of destiny no longer felt like a burden, but like wings, lifting her toward a future bright with possibility and rich with purpose. She was no longer the servant girl who had believed herself worth nothing. She was no longer even the confused young woman who had been thrown to the beasts as punishment for daring to raise her eyes. She was Queen Luna Moon Whisper, guardian of the ancient bonds, protector of the wild places, and mother to the next generation of rulers who would continue the work of healing their divided world. "When I stopped believing I was worthless," she said softly, her voice carrying across the garden to every listening ear, "I discovered that I was actually priceless, not because of my bloodline or my power, but because I finally understood that every living thing has value that can't be measured by others' opinions or conventional expectations." Kieran brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her palm that sent warmth racing through her entire body. "And now you'll teach our daughter the same truth. She'll never have to discover her worth, because she'll never be allowed to forget it." As night fell over the memorial garden and the creatures of her court settled into watchful rest around their beloved queen, Luna felt the deep, bone-deep satisfaction of someone who had found their true purpose and helped others find theirs as well. The old world had ended the night she was sealed in with the beasts. The new one would be born with her daughter, carried forward by love instead of fear, guided by wisdom instead of force. And in the years to come, when historians wrote about the transformation of their age, they would mark it not as the rise of the Beast Queen or the evolution of the Alpha King, but as the dawn of an era when power finally learned to serve love instead of replacing it. The future stretched before them like a golden road leading toward horizons bright with promise, and Luna could hardly wait to see what wonders they would discover together in the years yet to come. Chapter 2. The Alpha King's Arrival. Morning arrived with cruel efficiency. bleeding through the high windows of the arena in shafts of golden light that seemed to mock the darkness of what was to come. Luna had not slept. She had spent the hours before dawn watching the beasts, and being watched in return, caught in a strange dance of recognition that made no sense to her logical mind. The shadow wolf had moved closer to the bars of its cage, close enough that she could see the intelligence burning in those molten silver eyes. The fire drake had settled with its great head resting on scaled forelegs, breathing slow and steady as if it were guarding her sleep rather than waiting to devour her. Even the massive iron bear had positioned itself where it could keep her in sight, its metallic fur catching the early light like polished armour. None of it made sense. Luna had heard the stories of what happened to criminals in the beast arena, the screaming that echoed through the compound, the silence that always followed. But as dawn painted the stone walls in shades of amber and gold, she remained untouched, surrounded by creatures that should have torn her apart hours ago. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the stone corridor above, heavy and purposeful. Multiple sets of boots, the jangle of weapons, and voices that carried the authority of those accustomed to being obeyed without question. Luna's heart began to beat faster, not from fear of death, but from the sudden, inexplicable certainty that everything was about to change. "The servant girl better still be alive," a voice called down, rough with early morning irritation. "His Majesty doesn't appreciate having his entertainment spoiled by impatient beasts." Luna closed her eyes and tried to find the familiar numbness that had carried her through 23 years of cruelty and dismissal. But her wolf, awakened by whatever strange magic lived in this place, refused to settle. It paced restlessly beneath her skin, alert and waiting for something she could not name. Then he arrived, and the entire world shifted on its axis. Alpha King Kieran Blackthorn entered the arena like a force of nature made flesh. Luna felt his presence before she saw him, a pressure in the air that made her wolf stop pacing and go utterly still. When she finally lifted her eyes to the viewing platform carved into the arena's eastern wall, she understood why her people spoke of him in whispers. He was massive, even by werewolf standards, with shoulders that could bear the weight of kingdoms and hands that looked capable of crushing stone. His dark hair was pulled back from a face that belonged in ancient legends, all sharp angles and predatory grace. But it was his eyes that made Luna's breath catch in her throat. They were the colour of storm clouds, grey shot through with silver, and they held a wildness that called to something buried deep in her soul. He had come expecting to watch a servant girl be torn apart by beasts. Entertainment to start his morning, justice delivered with efficiency and spectacle. His gaze swept the arena with casual interest, taking in the cages that lined the walls, the blood-stained sand, and finally settling on the small figure sitting motionless in the centre cage. Luna felt the moment his attention locked onto her like a physical blow. Her wolf, which had been still as death, suddenly surged upward with a force that nearly knocked her sideways. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to look away, to drop her eyes and become invisible as she had learned to do. But something stronger than survival instinct kept her gaze locked with his. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, neither of them moved. Luna saw confusion flicker across his features, quickly followed by something that might have been recognition. His wolf, she realised with shock that sent ice through her veins, was responding to hers. She could feel it like electricity in the air between them, dangerous and impossible, and absolutely forbidden. Why hasn't she been torn apart yet? The voice belonged to Beta Marcus Steele, who had followed his king into the viewing area along with half a dozen other high-ranking pack members. "It's been hours since they threw her down there." Kieran did not answer immediately. His storm-grey eyes remained fixed on Luna, and she watched something shift in their depths. His nostrils flared slightly, as if he were trying to catch her scent from across the arena. His hands, which had been resting casually on the stone railing, tightened until his knuckles went white. "Something's wrong," he said finally, his voice carrying easily across the space between them. It was deep and rough like distant thunder, and it made Luna's wolf whine with longing. The beasts should have killed her by now. Maybe they're playing with their food, suggested Councilman Thorn, who had arrived with the dawn party and now stood slightly behind the Alpha King with barely concealed satisfaction. Some of the creatures like to toy with their prey before finishing them. But even as the words left his mouth, it was clear that was not what was happening. The shadow wolf had risen from its position near the bars and was now pacing along the front of its cage, not with the restless hunger of a predator stalking prey, but with the protective urgency of a guardian sensing threat to its charge. The fire drake had lifted its great head and was watching the viewing platform with eyes that glowed like coals, and the iron bear had moved to stand at full height, a mountain of metal and muscle that radiated menace toward anyone who might threaten the girl in the centre cage. "They're protecting her." The words escaped Kieran's lips as barely more than a whisper, but Luna heard them as clearly as if he had shouted them across the arena. Her wolf, which had been straining upward since the moment he appeared, suddenly went wild. Something was happening inside her, something that felt like recognition and hunger and homecoming all twisted together into a sensation so powerful she could barely breathe through it. Her skin felt too tight, her bones too small to contain whatever was trying to break free. And through it all, she could not look away from the Alpha King, whose own wolf was clearly fighting a battle for dominance behind those storm cloud eyes. "Impossible," Marcus breathed, moving closer to the railing to get a better view. "Wild beasts don't protect humans. They certainly don't protect servants." "No," Kieran agreed, but his voice had gone rough with an emotion Luna could not identify. "They don't." He studied her for another long moment, taking in her tangled dark hair, her simple servant's dress, the way she sat perfectly still, despite being surrounded by creatures that could end her life in seconds. Luna felt as if he were seeing not just her physical form, but something deeper, something she had never shown another living soul. "Cancel the execution," he said suddenly, the words carrying absolute authority that no one would dare question. "My lord!" Thorn stepped forward, confusion and disappointment warring in his voice. "The girl was sentenced for insolence. The law requires—" "The law," Kieran interrupted, his gaze still locked on Luna, "requires that I investigate any anomaly that might affect pack security. A servant girl who can command the loyalty of wild beasts is exactly the kind of anomaly that demands investigation." Luna felt the world tilt around her. She was not going to die this morning. Whatever force had awakened her wolf, whatever strange magic had made the beasts see her as something other than prey, had also caught the attention of the most powerful man in their world. And as Alpha King Kieran Blackthorn continued to stare at her with those storm-grey eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, Luna realised with a terror deeper than any fear of death that her life of invisible servitude was over. She just had no idea what was going to replace it. The beasts around her settled into watchful stillness, as if they too understood that everything had changed. Above them all, the Alpha King stood like a statue carved from granite and starlight, and Luna felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders like chains made of gold. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the kitchens and the safety of being nobody at all. Chapter 3. The impossible stillness. The hours that followed were a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Word of the cancelled execution spread through the compound like wildfire, and by mid-morning the viewing platform had filled with curious pack members who had come to witness the impossible spectacle for themselves. Luna remained in her cage, surrounded by beasts that should have devoured her, but instead watched over her like ancient guardians. The shadow wolf had positioned itself at the front of its enclosure, silver eyes never leaving her face. The fire drake kept its wings partially spread, creating a barrier between Luna and the growing crowd above. Even the iron bear had moved to face outward, its metallic bulk serving as a shield against whatever threat it sensed in the gathering pack members. "This is unnatural," whispered Elder Blackwood, his aged voice carrying clearly in the stone arena. "No creature of the wild would behave this way toward a human, let alone a servant." Luna could hear them all, their voices echoing off the arena walls in a symphony of confusion and growing unease. Some spoke of dark magic. Others muttered about ancient curses. A few suggested that she must be some kind of witch who had bewitched the beasts with forbidden spells. But it was not magic that made her skin prickle with awareness every time Alpha King Kieran moved on the platform above. It was not witchcraft that made her wolf strain against the invisible bonds that had kept it buried for so many years. Whatever was happening to her, it felt as natural as breathing and as inevitable as sunrise. "Send someone down to test them," commanded Beta Marcus, his voice sharp with authority. "If the beasts truly won't attack her, we need to understand why." Luna's blood turned to ice. She watched as 2 guards descended into the arena, their hands resting on the hilts of their silver-edged swords. They moved with the careful confidence of trained warriors, but she could smell their fear beneath the bravado. Everyone knew what happened to people who entered the beast arena uninvited. The Shadow Wolf's reaction was immediate and terrifying. The creature that had been watching Luna with something approaching tenderness suddenly became death incarnate, rising to its full height with lips pulled back to reveal fangs like ivory daggers. Its growl started low, a sound like distant thunder, then built to a roar that shook dust from the ancient stones. The fire drake spread its wings to their full span, nearly 12 feet from tip to tip, and the air around it began to shimmer with heat. Scales along its neck glowed cherry red, and smoke began to curl from its nostrils as it prepared to breathe flame. The iron bear reared onto its hind legs, towering nearly 10 feet tall, its metallic claws scraping against the stone floor in a sound like swords being drawn. Every beast in the arena had turned toward the approaching guards with identical expressions of lethal intent. They were no longer the contained creatures Luna had watched through the night. They were apex predators who had found something worth protecting, and they would kill anyone who threatened it. "Stop!" Luna's voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through the growls and the scrape of claws on stone. She had not meant to speak, had not even realized the word was forming on her lips until she heard it echo back from the arena walls. The effect was instantaneous. Every beast in the arena went silent, turning to look at her with expressions of perfect attention. The shadow wolf dropped back to all fours, though its silver eyes remained fixed on the guards. The fire drake folded its wings, but continued to radiate heat like a banked furnace. The iron bear settled onto its haunches, waiting. The 2 guards had frozen in place, their faces pale with shock and terror. One of them had half drawn his sword before Luna's command stopped the beasts mid-charge. Now he stood like a statue, afraid to move forward or back. "How?" Elder Blackwood's voice was barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence it carried like a shout. "How did she do that?" Luna stared at the beasts that had obeyed her without question, and felt something crack open inside her chest. She had spent her entire life being powerless, being told she was nothing, being treated as invisible. But these ancient creatures, these beings of tooth and claw and elemental fury, had listened to her voice as if it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Get them out of there," Kieran commanded, his voice rough with an emotion Luna could not identify. "Now." The guards needed no further encouragement. They backed toward the arena entrance with careful, measured steps, never taking their eyes off the beasts that watched their retreat with predatory stillness. Only when they had disappeared through the massive oak doors did the creatures settle back into their watchful poses. Luna looked up at the viewing platform and found Kieran staring down at her with an intensity that made her wolf whine with longing. His storm-grey eyes held questions she could not answer and a hunger that matched the ache building in her own chest. She commanded them, someone whispered. A servant girl commanded wild beasts like she was born to it. It's impossible, another voice insisted. No one has that kind of power, no one except. The sentence hung unfinished in the air, but Luna could feel the weight of whatever they were not saying. Her grandmother's stories flickered through her memory like half-remembered dreams. Tales of the first wolf queens who could speak to all creatures, who ruled not through strength alone, but through an ancient bond that connected them to the wild heart of the world. But those were just stories. Luna was nobody, nothing, a servant girl who scrubbed pots and kept her eyes down and tried to survive each day without drawing unwanted attention. She was not descended from legendary queens or blessed with mystical powers. The massive shadow wolf took a step closer to the bars that separated them, and Luna felt her breath catch. Up close, she could see that its eyes held depths like star-filled skies, ancient and knowing and impossibly sad. When it whined, soft and low, the sound went straight through her like an arrow finding its mark. Without thinking, Luna rose from her seated position and walked to the bars of her cage. The shadow wolf met her there, pressing its great head against the iron as close as it could get to her. When Luna reached through the bars to touch the creature's fur, it was like completing a circuit that had been broken for years. Power flowed between them, recognition and acceptance, and something that felt like coming home. The wolf's fur was softer than silk beneath her fingers, and when it looked up at her, Luna saw herself reflected in those silver depths, not as a servant or a nobody, but as someone worth following. The old bloodlines, Elder Blackwood breathed, and this time his voice carried clearly to every corner of the arena. The ancient pacts between the first queens and the creatures of the wild. But that's impossible. Those bloodlines were lost centuries ago. Luna felt every eye in the arena turn toward her, and for the first time in her life she did not look away. Her wolf was fully awake now, straining against whatever bonds had kept it buried, and with each passing moment the impossible felt more and more like destiny. Above them all, Alpha King Kieran Blackthorn watched with eyes like storm clouds, and Luna could feel his wolf calling to hers across the space between them. Whatever was happening, whatever power was awakening in her blood, he was as much a part of it as the beasts that had chosen to protect her. The shadow wolf nuzzled against her palm, and Luna felt the last of her old certainties crumble away. She was no longer the girl who believed herself worthless. She was becoming something else entirely, something that made ancient creatures bow their heads and kings stare in wonder. And deep in her bones she could feel that this was only the beginning. Chapter 4. The Oracle's Whisper. The ancient woman arrived like mist-given form, materializing from the shadows of the arena entrance, as if she had been summoned by the very air itself. Oracle Myron had not been seen in the compound for nearly a decade, and her sudden appearance sent ripples of unease through the gathered pack members. She moved with the careful grace of someone whose bones had seen too many winters, but her eyes held the fierce clarity of eternal flame. Luna felt the oracle's presence before she saw her, a prickling along her spine that made her wolf lift its head in recognition. The shadow wolf beside her cage whined softly, a sound of reverence rather than distress, and every beast in the arena turned toward the approaching figure with expressions of profound respect. "Old blood awakens," the oracle said, her voice carrying easily across the stone arena despite its whispered tone. The forgotten queens stir in their ancient sleep, and the pacts made in starlight and moonbeam remember their purpose. Elder Blackwood stepped forward on the viewing platform, his aged face creased with concern. "Oracle Myron, what brings you to witness this anomaly?" The old woman's eyes, pale as winter morning, swept the arena before settling on Luna with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Anomaly?" Her laugh was like the sound of wind through autumn leaves. Child, there is nothing anomalous about a queen recognizing her subjects, or subjects recognizing their queen. Luna's heart stuttered in her chest. Queen. The word echoed in her mind like a bell tolling in an empty cathedral. Impossible and terrifying and somehow inevitable. She pressed her back against the iron bars of her cage, but the shadow wolf moved closer, offering comfort and warmth through the metal barrier. "That is impossible," Councilman Thorne interjected, his voice sharp with dismissal. "She is a servant, less than that. Her bloodline is common. Her parents were nobody." "Were they?" Oracle Mirren turned her ancient gaze on him, and Thorne's words died in his throat. "Tell me, Councilman, what do you know of bloodlines deliberately obscured? Of royal heirs hidden among servants to prevent the wars that nearly destroyed us 3 centuries ago?" The silence that followed was so complete, Luna could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She thought of her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a hunting accident when Luna was barely old enough to remember their faces. Her grandmother who had told stories of wolf queens who could speak to all creatures, who had ruled through bonds deeper than dominance or submission. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," Luna found herself saying, the words escaping before she could stop them. "About the first queens who made pacts with the beasts of the wild, but they were just stories." Oracle Mirren smiled, and the expression transformed her weathered features into something luminous. "Stories have power, child. They carry truth across generations when truth itself becomes too dangerous to speak aloud." The old woman moved closer to Luna's cage, and the beasts parted before her like water before the prow of a ship. When she reached the iron bars, she extended one gnarled hand through the metal, palm up in invitation. "Your grandmother was Elara Moonwhisper," the oracle said softly. "Last of the hidden court, keeper of the old ways, protector of the final bloodline. She died knowing that one day you would awaken to what you truly are." Luna's hand moved without conscious thought, reaching out to touch the oracle's palm. The moment their skin met, the world exploded into light and memory, an ancient knowledge that flooded through her like a river finding the sea. She saw her grandmother as a young woman, beautiful and fierce, standing before a council of elders as they decided to hide the surviving royal bloodline among the common folk. She saw babies switched in the night, noble children raised as servants, while servant children lived in luxury and safety. She saw her true parents, not the hunters who had died, but a king and queen, whose love had been doomed by politics and war. She saw herself as she truly was, Luna Moonwhisper, last daughter of the ancient wolf queens, heir to powers that had been sleeping in her blood for 23 years. "The memories," Oracle Mirren whispered, her voice gentle as a mother's lullaby. "They were sealed away to protect you, but the time for hiding is past. The beasts know what you are because they remember the old pacts, the bonds forged between your bloodline and theirs in the first days of our kind." Luna gasped, pulling her hand back as the visions faded, leaving her reeling with the weight of truth. She was not nobody. She was not nothing. She was the culmination of a bloodline that stretched back to the dawn of the werewolf world, and the power stirring in her bones was her birthright finally claiming its due. "This changes nothing," Thorne said desperately, his voice cracking with the effort to maintain authority. "Even if these wild claims were true, she was sentenced for insolence. The law—" "The law," interrupted a new voice, rough with controlled power, "recognizes blood right above all other considerations." Every head turned toward Alpha King Kieran, who had been silent throughout the oracle's revelation. His storm-grey eyes were fixed on Luna with an intensity that made her wolf sing with recognition and longing. When he spoke again, his voice carried the absolute authority of someone born to rule. "If she is truly of the Moon Whisper line, then she outranks every person in this arena except myself. The old laws are clear on this matter." Luna stared up at him, seeing something in his expression that made her breath catch. He was not surprised by the oracle's revelation. If anything, he looked like a man who had been waiting for confirmation of something he already suspected. "How long have you known?" she asked, the words barely more than a whisper. Kieran's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "From the moment I saw you surrounded by beasts that should have torn you apart. My wolf recognized yours before my mind understood what it was seeing." The shadow wolf pressed closer to Luna's side, its massive form radiating warmth and comfort. Around the arena, every creature had settled into postures of deep respect, acknowledging what the oracle had revealed and what the Alpha King had confirmed. Oracle Myron nodded with satisfaction, her ancient eyes bright with approval. "The awakening begins," she said, stepping back from the cage. "But know this, child of queens, power awakened too quickly can destroy as easily as it protects. The path ahead will test every part of you, and the cost of claiming your birthright may be higher than you imagine." Luna felt the truth of those words settle into her bones like stones sinking into deep water. She was no longer the servant girl who had scrubbed pots in the pre-dawn darkness. She was becoming something else, something powerful and dangerous and necessary. And as Alpha King Kieran Blackthorn continued to watch her with eyes like storm clouds, Luna realized that her awakening was connected to his presence in ways that went deeper than politics or pack law. Her wolf was calling to his across the space between them, and his was answering with a hunger that matched her own. The oracle turned to leave as suddenly as she had arrived, but her final words echoed in the stone arena like a prophecy carved in starlight. "The queen is coming home. Let those who would stand against her beware, for she brings with her the fury of the wild and the justice of the ancient ways. The time of hiding is over." As the old woman disappeared into the shadows from which she had emerged, Luna sat surrounded by beasts that now looked at her with reverence rather than mere protection. Above her, the Alpha King stood like a statue carved from determination and desire, and she could feel the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a crown made of moonlight and promise. Everything had changed, and somehow Luna knew that everything was about to change even more. Chapter 5. The Growing Bond. The days that followed were a blur of whispered conversations and careful observation, as the pack struggled to reconcile what they had witnessed with everything they thought they knew about bloodlines and power. Luna remained in the arena, not as a prisoner awaiting execution, but as something far more dangerous, a queen discovering the extent of her birthright. The beasts had become her court, gathering around her cage with the reverence of subjects acknowledging their rightful ruler. The shadow wolf, whom Luna had begun to think of as Night Whisper, rarely left the bars that separated them. The fire drake, magnificent wings folded with regal bearing, positioned itself where it could watch both Luna and the viewing platform above. Even the iron bear, massive and imposing, had claimed a spot where it could serve as a living shield between Luna and any who might approach with hostile intent. But it was not the beasts that consumed Luna's thoughts as she sat in the filtered sunlight that streamed through the arena's high windows. It was the constant awareness of Alpha King Kieran's presence somewhere above, the way her wolf stirred restlessly whenever he moved through the compound, the golden thread that seemed to connect her heart to his across stone and steel, and the impossible gulf between servant and king. He came to watch her every morning, standing at the viewing platform's edge with his hands gripped on the stone railing, as if it were the only thing keeping him from leaping down to join her among the beasts. Luna could feel his eyes on her like physical touch, could sense the war raging between his human logic and his wolf's desperate need to be near her. "This is madness," Beta Marcus had said on the second morning, his voice carrying clearly in the arena's acoustics. "You spend hours watching her like she's some kind of fascinating puzzle. She's still the same servant girl, royal blood or not." Luna had heard Kieran's growl in response, low and dangerous, and felt answering heat flare in her own chest. Her wolf wanted to defend him just as fiercely as he seemed inclined to defend her, and the intensity of that protective instinct frightened her more than any revelation about queens or bloodlines. "She is not the same," Kieran had replied, his voice rough with an emotion Luna was learning to recognize as barely leashed hunger. "Look at her, Marcus. Really look. Tell me you don't see the power awakening in her." And it was true. Luna could feel herself changing, growing into something larger and more dangerous with each passing hour. Her senses had sharpened until she could hear conversations 3 levels above the arena. Her strength had increased to the point where she could have bent the iron bars of her cage if she chose to test them. Most unsettling of all, she was beginning to hear the thoughts of the beasts around her, their ancient voices whispering in languages older than words. The Shadow Wolf's voice was like silver bells in moonlight. "Queenheart," it called her. "Starborn daughter, you wake at last." The fire drake's thoughts burned like molten gold. "We have waited so long for your return, Moon Whisper child. The old pacts stir in our blood, and we remember our purpose." Even the Iron Bear, stoic and imposing, radiated thoughts of fierce protection and ancient loyalty. "Let them try to harm you, little queen. They will learn why the first queens chose us as guardians." But beneath the wonder of communicating with creatures of legend, Luna felt a deeper, more dangerous awakening. Every time Kieran appeared on the viewing platform, every time his storm-grey eyes met hers across the space between them, something pulled taut in her chest like a golden wire being stretched to its breaking point. On the 3rd morning he came alone. Luna looked up from where she sat with her back against Night Whisper's cage, the great wolf's presence a comfort she had never known she needed. Kieran stood at the platform's edge, his massive frame silhouetted against the pale dawn light, and she could see the tension radiating from every line of his body. "You're afraid of me," she said, the words carrying easily across the arena. It was not a question. Kieran's laugh was harsh and self-deprecating. "Terrified," he admitted, his honesty catching her off guard. "But not for the reasons you might think. Tell me." Luna rose to her feet, moving to the front of her cage where she could see him more clearly. Behind her, Night Whisper whined softly, sensing the emotional undercurrents flowing between them. "I'm afraid," Kieran said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "because my wolf has been howling for 3 days straight, demanding I come down there and claim you as mine. I'm afraid because every instinct I possess is screaming that you belong to me, and I belong to you, and politics and pack law and the fact that I'm supposed to mate with another in 6 months means nothing against that certainty." Luna's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected, had felt the pull between them growing stronger each day, but hearing him voice it made the impossible suddenly, terrifyingly real. "The mate bond," she whispered, and saw him flinch as if the words were a physical blow. "The mate bond," he confirmed, his knuckles white where they gripped the stone railing. "Complete and absolute and utterly inconvenient. My wolf recognizes yours as its perfect match, and no amount of political necessity is going to change that." Luna felt something crack open in her chest, a warmth spreading through her veins like liquid starlight. She had spent her entire life believing herself unworthy of love, undeserving of anything beyond basic survival. The idea that the most powerful man in their world was fighting a losing battle against his need for her was almost too overwhelming to process. "What does that mean for us?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would break her heart. Kieran closed his eyes, his jaw clenched with the effort of maintaining control. "It means I have 6 months to find a way to break a political alliance that's taken 3 years to negotiate. It means I have to choose between my pack's survival and my soul's other half. It means we're both probably doomed." The fire drake stirred behind Luna, sensing her distress, and she felt its ancient anger flare in response to her pain. Around the arena, every beast began to shift restlessly, responding to the emotional turmoil of their chosen queen. "I won't ask you to choose," Luna said quietly, though the words felt like swallowing glass. "I know what duty means. I know what sacrifice looks like." "Don't." Kieran's voice cracked like a whip, sharp with command and desperate pleading. "Don't you dare sacrifice yourself for politics again. You've spent 23 years being told you're worth nothing, being treated like you don't matter. I will not be another person who asks you to disappear for everyone else's convenience." The raw pain in his voice sent Night Whisper into a frenzy of protective whining, the great wolf pressing against the bars as if trying to offer comfort across the impossible distance. Luna felt tears she had not shed in years burning behind her eyes, and with them came a fierce, terrible hope that maybe, just maybe, she was worth fighting for. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the restless movements of the beasts. Kieran opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her wolf keen with longing. "We find another way. We break the rules that were never meant to contain queens and kings who were made for each other. We fight for what should have been ours from the moment we first breathed the same air." Luna felt the truth of his words settle into her bones like an oath written in starlight and sealed with moonbeams. She was no longer the servant girl who accepted whatever scraps of life were thrown her way. She was becoming a queen, and queens, she was learning, did not bow to political convenience. "The other packs will see it as an act of war," she said, testing the waters of this new, dangerous possibility. "Let them." Kieran's smile was sharp as winter wind and twice as deadly. "They seem to forget that I didn't become Alpha King by backing down from fights." Around them, the beasts settled into watchful stillness, as if they too understood that something fundamental had shifted in the space between their queen and her chosen king. The golden thread connecting Luna's heart to Kieran's hummed with new purpose, no longer a source of agonizing impossibility, but the beginning of a bond that would reshape their world. Luna pressed her palm against the iron bars that separated them, wishing desperately that she could touch him, could offer the comfort and connection that both their wolves craved. 6 months, she said, making it sound like both a promise and a challenge. "Six true?" 6 months, Kieran agreed, his own hand moving to mirror hers against the stone railing. "And then we'll see just how much trouble a queen and her king can cause when they stop apologizing for what they are." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the arena walls in shades of gold and amber, Luna felt the last of her old certainties fall away. She was no longer content to be hidden, no longer willing to sacrifice her happiness for others' peace of mind. She was awakening, and the world would never be the same. Chapter 6. The Challenge from Above. The fourth morning brought more than dawn light streaming through the arena's ancient windows. It brought the sharp click of expensive heels on stone and the rustle of silk that announced the arrival of someone accustomed to being the centre of attention wherever she went. Luna felt the shift in the air before she saw her, a prickling along her skin that made Night Whisper rise to his feet with a low growl rumbling in his chest. The other beasts stirred restlessly, sensing threat in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with the territorial instincts that ran deeper than rational thought. Lady Seraphina Ravencrest descended into the viewing area like a queen claiming her throne, her platinum blonde hair catching the morning light like spun silver. She was everything Luna was not, elegant where Luna was practical, refined where Luna was rough around the edges, born to privilege where Luna had been raised in service. She wore her beauty like armour and her noble bloodline like a crown, and every step she took radiated the confidence of someone who had never been told she was worth nothing. "So, this is the creature that has bewitched my intended," Seraphina said, her voice carrying clearly across the arena with the kind of projection that came from years of commanding attention in crowded rooms. Luna's wolf snarled with sudden vicious jealousy, and she had to grip the iron bars of her cage to keep from showing the reaction on her face. My intended. The words hit like physical blows, reminders of the political reality that stood between Luna and any hope of claiming her mate. "Lady Ravencrest," Kieran's voice was carefully neutral, but Luna could hear the strain beneath his diplomatic tone. He had not expected her arrival, had not prepared for this confrontation between his political obligation and his heart's choice. "Don't you Lady Ravencrest me, Kieran!" Seraphina snapped, her composure cracking to reveal the fury beneath. "I've been hearing whispers for 3 days about how you spend every morning down here staring at a servant girl like she holds the secrets of the universe. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is for me?" Luna watched the exchange with growing dread, seeing the way Seraphina's anger was directed not just at Kieran, but at her. The other woman's pale blue eyes held the kind of calculation that came from a lifetime of political manoeuvring, and Luna recognised the look of someone sizing up an obstacle that needed to be removed. "The situation is complicated," Kieran said carefully, but Seraphina cut him off with a laugh like breaking glass. "Complicated? She's a servant who got lucky enough to survive a night with some beasts. That doesn't make her special, Kieran. That makes her a curiosity, and curiosities fade." The fire drake behind Luna shifted with dangerous grace, its wings rustling like thunderclouds gathering for a storm. Around the arena, every beast turned toward the viewing platform with expressions of barely contained hostility. They could sense the threat to their chosen queen, and their ancient instincts were responding with lethal intent. "You might want to choose your words more carefully," Luna said quietly, her voice carrying easily in the stone chamber. "My friends here don't appreciate insults to their queen." Seraphina's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Queen? You? A servant girl with delusions of grandeur and a handful of trained animals?" She turned to address Kieran directly, her voice rising with indignation. "This is what you're throwing away our alliance for? This is what you think is worth more than the combined armies of 3 packs? "That's enough!" Kieran's voice cracked like a whip, carrying absolute authority that made several pack members on the platform take involuntary steps backward. "You will show respect when speaking of Luna Moon Whisper, last of the ancient bloodlines." "Ancient bloodlines," Seraphina scoffed, though Luna noticed she had taken her own step back at Kieran's tone. "Convenient claims with no proof beyond some wild animals acting strangely. I could train circus beasts to perform the same tricks given enough time." The insult hit its mark, and Luna felt her carefully maintained control begin to slip. Power surged through her veins like liquid lightning, and she saw Night Whisper's silver eyes begin to glow with reflected energy. The fire drake's scales started to shimmer with heat, and the iron bear rose to its full, intimidating height. "Seraphina!" Kieran warned, genuine alarm entering his voice as he sensed the building supernatural tension. "Stop, now!" But Seraphina was past listening, her fury at being displaced driving her to push boundaries that should never be tested. "You want proof she's nothing special? Send someone down there to test these so-called loyal beasts. I guarantee once they smell real authority instead of this pathetic pretender—" "Guards," she called over her shoulder, her voice sharp with command, "enter the arena and bring me the servant. I want to see how loyal these creatures are when faced with someone who actually matters." The response was immediate and terrifying. Every beast in the arena erupted into motion at once, roars and growls echoing off the stone walls in a symphony of rage that shook dust from the ancient rafters. The shadow wolf's howl rose above the rest, a sound like winter wind through mountain peaks, calling to something primal and dangerous in Luna's blood. But it was not the beast's reaction that silenced the entire viewing platform. It was Luna's. Power exploded from her like a wave, visible as golden light that washed over every surface in the arena. Her hair whipped around her face as if caught in hurricane winds that touched nothing else, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in the bones of everyone present. "Enough!" The single word hit the air like a thunderclap, and every beast in the arena went instantly, perfectly silent. The guards who had been moving toward the arena entrance froze mid-step. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Luna rose to her feet with fluid grace, and for the first time since her imprisonment began, she looked every inch the queen she was born to be. Power radiated from her like heat from a forge, and when she fixed her gaze on Seraphina, the other woman went pale as winter snow. "You want to test my authority?" Luna asked, her voice soft as silk and twice as dangerous. "You want to see what these ancient creatures think of someone who actually matters?" She placed her hand against the lock of her cage, and the iron turned molten under her touch, flowing away like water. The door swung open with barely a whisper of sound, and Luna stepped out into the arena proper for the first time since her imprisonment began. The beasts converged on her immediately, but not as predators approaching prey. They came as subjects greeting their rightful ruler, pressing close enough to offer comfort and protection while maintaining the reverence due to royalty. Night Whisper took position at her right side, the fire drake at her left, and the iron bear moved to stand behind her like a mountain of living metal. "This is what real authority looks like," Luna said, never taking her eyes off Seraphina's terrified face. "This is what it means to be chosen by powers older than your political alliances and more enduring than your noble bloodlines." She took a step toward the viewing platform, and every person there except Kieran moved backward. The Alpha King stood frozen at the railing, his storm-grey eyes wide with wonder and hunger as he watched his mate claim her power before the entire pack. "You want to send guards against me?" Luna continued, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the arena. "Go ahead, send them. Let's see how long they last against creatures who remember the old pacts, who have been waiting centuries for their queen to come home." The fire drake spread its wings to their full span, and the air around it began to shimmer with heat. The iron bear's claws scraped against stone in a sound like swords being sharpened. Around the arena, dozens of other beasts had moved to the fronts of their cages, all of them watching Luna with expressions of absolute devotion. Seraphina started, then stopped, apparently unable to find words for what she was witnessing. "You thought I was nothing," Luna said, her voice gentling but losing none of its power. "You thought I was a servant girl playing at being important, but I am Luna Moon Whisper, daughter of the first queens, heir to bonds forged in starlight and sealed with ancient promises. These creatures don't follow me because I trained them. They follow me because they recognize what you refuse to see." She looked up at Kieran, and the mate bond between them flared like a star being born. "I am his equal, not his curiosity, his partner, not his distraction. And if you think a few political treaties are going to stand between us and what we were made for, then you understand nothing about the power that flows in royal blood." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft sounds of the beasts settling around their queen. Luna stood in the centre of the arena, surrounded by creatures of legend, power radiating from every line of her body, and even the most sceptical pack member could no longer deny what they were seeing. She was not a servant who had gotten lucky. She was a queen who had finally come home, and as Alpha King Kieran Blackthorn stared down at her with naked longing and fierce pride, Luna knew that the time for hiding was truly over. Let them see what she was. Let them fear what she could become. The real battle was only just beginning. Chapter 7. The Night of Truth. That night, alone in the darkness with only the soft breathing of sleeping beasts for company, Luna finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she was becoming. The arena had been cleared of spectators hours ago, the torches dimmed to flickering shadows that danced across the ancient stone walls. Kieran had been the last to leave, his storm-grey eyes holding promises he could not yet voice before duty dragged him back to the world above. Luna remained in the centre of the arena, no longer caged but choosing to stay among the creatures who had claimed her as their queen. Night Whisper lay beside her, his massive form radiating warmth in the cool underground air. The fire drake had settled nearby, its inner flame banked to a gentle glow that cast ruby highlights across its scales. Even the iron bear, usually so vigilant and imposing, had allowed itself to rest, though its metallic ears remained pricked for any sign of danger to their chosen ruler. For the first time in years, Luna felt truly safe. Not the temporary safety of invisibility or the desperate safety of avoiding notice, but the deep, bone-deep security that came from being surrounded by beings who would die before allowing harm to reach her. She closed her eyes and let her consciousness drift deeper than she had ever dared before, sinking past the careful walls she had built around her wolf, past the barriers her grandmother had woven to protect her from those who would have killed her for her bloodline. In the perfect stillness of the arena, with ancient guardians watching over her dreams, Luna finally allowed herself to remember who she truly was. The visions came like water breaking through a dam, flooding her mind with memories that were both hers and not hers, experiences that belonged to the long line of queens whose blood flowed in her veins. She saw the first queen, Lunara the Moonborn, standing on a cliff overlooking endless wilderness as creatures of every kind bowed before her, not from fear or domination, but from love and recognition of the sacred bond that connected all living things. The Queen's power had not been about controlling the wild, but about being part of it, about speaking the language that all creatures understood in their deepest hearts. She saw Queen Sylviana the Wise, who had prevented the great war between wolves and humans by forging alliances with both sides, her ability to communicate with all beings, making her the perfect bridge between worlds. She saw Queen Morrigan the Fierce, who had led packs of wolves alongside flights of dragons to defend their territory from invaders who sought to destroy the ancient ways. Each queen had been different, but all had shared the same gift, the ability to see the connections that bound all living things together, to speak to the wild heart that beat in every creature's chest, to understand that true power came not from dominance but from unity. And now that gift was awakening in Luna, flowing through her veins like liquid starlight as her wolf finally broke free from the constraints that had held it captive for 23 years. The transformation began slowly, a tingling in her fingertips that spread up her arms like electricity finding its path home. Luna gasped, her eyes flying open as power surged through every cell of her body, rewriting her very DNA to match the legacy written in her blood. Her senses exploded outward with devastating clarity. She could hear the heartbeats of every creature in the arena, could smell the unique scent signature of each beast as distinctly as if they were standing directly beside her. More than that, she could feel their emotions, their thoughts, their ancient memories of queens who had ruled with wisdom and compassion. Queen Heart, Night Whisper's voice whispered in her mind, clear as spoken words. You wake at last. We have waited so long for your return. Luna turned to look at the great shadow wolf, seeing him not just with her physical eyes, but with the deeper sight that allowed her to perceive the golden threads of connection that bound them together. He was not just a beast who had chosen to follow her. He was part of her court, her family, her pack in the truest sense of the word. How long have you been waiting? She asked, the mental communication feeling as natural as breathing. Since the last queen died, came the reply, tinged with centuries of patient sorrow. We are bound to your bloodline by oaths older than kingdoms, by love stronger than death. When there is no queen to serve, we sleep and wait and dream of the day she will come home. Around the arena, other voices began to join the conversation, each beast adding its own thread to the tapestry of connection that surrounded Luna like a warm embrace. The fire drake spoke of ancient battles fought alongside her ancestors. The iron bear shared memories of queens who had been both fierce warriors and gentle mothers. Smaller creatures, wolves and wild cats and great horned owls, whispered of hunts and flights and long nights spent protecting the sacred groves where the first queens had made their homes. Luna felt tears streaming down her face as the weight of their devotion settled around her shoulders like a mantle made of moonbeams and stardust. She was not just inheriting power, she was inheriting responsibility to beings who had sacrificed everything to keep faith with her bloodline. "What happened to the others?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would break her heart. "War," Night Whisper replied simply. "Fear of what queens could become, jealousy of the bonds they shared with creatures like us. The old ways were forgotten, and power became about taking rather than giving, about ruling rather than serving. Your grandmother was the last, and when she went into hiding to protect you, we were scattered to the winds." Luna pressed her face against the great wolf's fur, breathing in the scent of pine forests and winter nights and loyalty that had endured across centuries. She understood now why her transformation felt like both awakening and homecoming. She was not just becoming who she was meant to be. She was completing a circle that had been broken for far too long. "But now you're here," the fire drake added, its mental voice like the sound of wind through flames. "And the old bonds remember their strength. Feel how the earth rejoices at your awakening, little queen. Feel how the very stones of this place sing with recognition." Luna stretched out her newly awakened senses and gasped at what she discovered. The arena was not just a prison for captured beasts. It was built on a site of ancient power, a place where the first queens had communed with the wild spirits of the earth. The stones themselves hummed with residual magic, and the iron bars of the empty cages resonated like tuning forks struck by invisible hands. More than that, she could sense the network of connections that spread out from this place like roots from a great tree. Every creature within miles of the compound, from the smallest field mouse to the great elk that roamed the northern forests, was aware of her awakening. They felt the return of their ancient queen like a song in their blood, and they were stirring from sleep and stupor to answer a call they had almost forgotten how to hear. "The pack will not understand," Luna said, fear threading through her wonder as she contemplated the magnitude of what was happening to her. "They see power as dominance, leadership as control. They won't know what to do with a queen who rules through love." "Then you will teach them," Night Whisper replied with gentle certainty. "As your ancestors taught those who came before, change is not easy, but it is necessary. The world has forgotten how to live in harmony with the wild, and that forgetting has made everyone poorer." Luna felt the truth of his words settle into her bones like seeds taking root in fertile soil. She was not just awakening to her power, she was awakening to her purpose. The beasts had not chosen her simply because of her bloodline. They had chosen her because the world needed what she could offer, needed someone who could bridge the gap between civilization and wilderness, between the human heart and the wolf soul. As dawn approached, painting the high windows with fingers of rose and gold, Luna rose to her feet and felt the full weight of her transformation settle around her like armour made of starlight. She was no longer the servant girl who had scrubbed pots in the pre-dawn darkness. She was no longer even the confused young woman who had been thrown to the beasts as punishment for daring to raise her eyes. She was Queen Luna Moon Whisper, heir to the ancient ways, guardian of the bonds that connected all living things. And as the first light of morning touched her face, she felt Kieran's presence stirring somewhere far above, his wolf calling to hers across stone and steel and the impossible distance that separated servant from king. But that distance was shrinking with every heartbeat, and Luna knew that soon there would be nothing left between them but the truth of what they were meant to be together. The night of hiding was over. The dawn of queens had begun. Chapter 8. The Alpha King Descends. The morning brought with it a tension that seemed to press against the very walls of the arena, thick as storm clouds gathering before lightning strikes. Luna stood in the centre of the space that had once been her prison, surrounded by her court of ancient guardians, and felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a mantle made of starlight and inevitability. She had been awake since before dawn, her newly awakened senses making sleep impossible as she felt every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of emotion from the creatures that had claimed her as their queen. But more than that, she had been aware of him, of Kieran moving restlessly through the compound above, his wolf pacing like a caged thing beneath his human skin. The mate bond stretched between them like a golden thread pulled taut to the breaking point, humming with unspoken words and unfulfilled promises. Luna could feel his internal battle, the war between duty and desire, between the king who had responsibilities to an entire pack, and the man whose soul recognised its other half in a woman the world had dismissed as nobody. When the massive oak doors groaned open at the arena's entrance, Luna felt the shift in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. But this time, Kieran did not go to the viewing platform. This time, he descended the ancient stone steps into the arena itself, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat in the sudden, profound silence. The beasts reacted immediately, rising from their positions around Luna with expressions of territorial warning. Night Whisper's silver eyes began to glow with supernatural light, and a growl rumbled in his chest like distant thunder. The fire drake spread its wings partially, scales beginning to shimmer with internal heat. The iron bear rose to its full intimidating height, metallic claws scraping against stone in a sound like swords being drawn. They saw an intruder in their sacred space, a threat to the queen they had waited centuries to serve. Ancient instincts older than civilization itself demanded they protect her from any who would dare approach without permission. But Luna felt something else entirely. She felt recognition. "Stand down," she said quietly, her voice carrying easily across the arena with the authority of someone born to command. "He is not our enemy." The effect was immediate and absolute. Every beast in the arena went silent, turning to look at their queen with expressions of perfect attention. Night Whisper whined softly, his great head tilting as he tried to understand why Luna would allow a potential threat so close. But he obeyed, settling back onto his haunches while maintaining watchful vigilance. Kieran continued his descent, moving with the controlled grace of a predator who knew he was entering another predator's territory. He wore simple clothes today, dark pants and a white shirt that did nothing to diminish the overwhelming presence that radiated from him like heat from a forge. His storm-grey eyes were fixed on Luna with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. When he reached the arena floor, he paused at the entrance to the sandy circle where Luna stood surrounded by creatures of legend. The mate bond between them flared like a star being born, and Luna felt her wolf surge upward with desperate longing. "You came down here," she said, stating the obvious because she could not quite believe it was happening. "I had to," Kieran replied, his voice rough with emotions he was no longer trying to hide. "My wolf has been going insane for days, demanding I come to you. I couldn't stay away any longer." He took a step forward, then stopped as several of the beasts shifted restlessly. Luna could feel their confusion and concern, their inability to understand why their queen would welcome someone whose presence made every territorial instinct they possessed scream warnings. "They don't trust you yet," Luna said softly, moving closer to the invisible line that separated her from the man who held her heart in his hands. "They see you as a threat to something they've protected for centuries." "And what do you see me as?" Kieran asked, his storm-grey eyes searching her face with desperate intensity. Luna felt the truth rise in her throat like a song that had been waiting her entire life to be sung. "I see you as mine," she whispered, and watched his pupils dilate with hunger and recognition. The mate bond snapped into place between them like a key turning in a lock, complete and undeniable and overwhelming in its absolute rightness. Luna gasped as golden light flooded her vision, as every cell in her body recognized its perfect match in the man standing before her. She felt his wolf reaching across the space between them, felt her own wolf rising to meet it in a dance older than civilization itself. Kieran made a sound like a man drowning, his hands clenching into fists at his sides as he fought not to cross the distance between them and claim her mouth with his. "Luna," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. But even as the bond completed itself, Luna felt Kieran's wolf do something that should have been impossible. Instead of asserting dominance, instead of demanding submission as every alpha instinct demanded, his wolf lowered its great head in acknowledgement of her power. The reaction from Luna's court was immediate and astonishing. Night Whisper's growl cut off mid-sound, his silver eyes widening with what looked like shock. The fire drake folded its wings completely, settling onto the arena floor in a posture of respect. Even the iron bear, massive and imposing, dropped its defensive stance and watched with ancient eyes that seemed to understand something profound was happening. "They recognize you," Luna said with wonder, watching as her beasts began to settle around them in a protective circle rather than a threatening barrier. "They know what you are to me." Kieran's laugh was shaky with relief and disbelief. "What am I to you, Luna? Because I know what you are to me, but I'm afraid to say it out loud in case it breaks whatever spell is letting me stand here with you." Luna felt tears burning behind her eyes. 23 years of believing herself unworthy of love, finally cracking apart under the weight of what she saw in his expression. "You're my mate," she said, the words feeling like coming home. "My partner, my equal. The other half of my soul that I didn't know was missing until I found it." Kieran closed his eyes as if her words were a physical blow, and when he opened them again, Luna saw her own hunger and desperation reflected back at her. "The bond is complete," he said, his voice rough with awe and terror. "I can feel everything you're feeling, and you can feel me, can't you?" Luna nodded, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions flowing between them. His love and her wonder, his protective fury and her fierce pride, his terror of losing her and her absolute certainty that they belonged together. The mate bond was not just connection, it was completion. Two souls that had been carved from the same star finally finding their way back to each other. "What happens now?" she asked, though she could feel his answer through the bond before he spoke it. "Now," Kieran said, taking another step closer as the beasts continued to settle around them in acceptance. "I choose you over politics. I choose us over convenience. I choose love over duty, and I don't care who that makes angry." Luna felt her heart stop, then start again with a rhythm that matched his perfectly. "The alliance with the Ravencrest pack." "We'll survive or it won't," Kieran interrupted, moving close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I won't sacrifice my mate for political convenience. I won't ask you to disappear again to make other people comfortable." Night Whisper whined softly and pressed his great head against Luna's side, offering comfort and support as his queen processed the magnitude of what was being offered to her. The fire drake settled closer, creating a wall of protective warmth, and the iron bear positioned itself where it could watch the entrances for any who might interrupt this moment. "They accept you," Luna said with wonder, reaching out to touch Kieran's hand with trembling fingers. "The beasts, they understand what you mean to me." "And I understand what they mean to you," Kieran replied, his own hand turning to capture hers, skin against skin, sending shockwaves of recognition through the completed bond. "You're not just my mate, Luna. You're a queen in your own right, with your own court and your own power. I don't want to diminish that. I want to stand beside it." Luna felt something break open in her chest, a warmth spreading through her veins like liquid starlight as she finally, truly understood that she was loved not despite her power, but because of it. Kieran did not want to cage her or control her or make her small enough to fit into convenient spaces. He wanted to help her become everything she was meant to be. "The pack will rebel," she said, voicing the practical concern even as her heart soared with impossible hope. "Let them try." Kieran's smile was sharp as winter wind and twice as deadly. "They seem to forget that queens and kings who are truly mated are stronger than any political alliance. They also seem to forget that you command the loyalty of creatures that could tear them apart if they threaten what belongs to you." Around them, the beasts settled into watchful contentment, ancient guardians finally able to rest, knowing their queen had found her perfect match. The mate bond hummed between Luna and Kieran like music made visible, golden threads of connection that bound them not just to each other, but to the destiny they would forge together. Luna looked up into storm-grey eyes that held her entire future and felt the last of her old certainties fall away. She was no longer the servant girl who accepted whatever scraps of life were thrown her way. She was a queen who had found her king, and together they would remake their world into something worthy of the love they shared. "Then we fight," she said, making it sound like both a promise and a declaration of war. "Then we fight," Kieran agreed, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss against her palm that sent fire racing through her veins. "And we win." As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the arena walls in shades of gold and victory, Luna stood surrounded by the court that had chosen her and the man who completed her, and felt destiny settling around them like a crown made of starlight and inevitability. The real battle was about to begin. But for the first time in her life, Luna knew she would not be fighting it alone. Chapter 9. The Pack's Rebellion. The news spread through the compound like wildfire through dry grass, carried on whispers that grew louder and more dangerous with each telling. Alpha King, Kieran Blackthorn, had entered the beast arena. He had claimed Luna Moon Whisper as his true mate. The political alliance with the Ravencrest pack, 3 years in the making, lay in ruins before it had even been formally sealed. Luna felt the shift in the air long before the first angry voices reached the arena. Her newly awakened senses picked up the rapid heartbeats of agitated pack members, the sharp scent of fear and fury, the electricity of a mob forming in the corridors above. Through the mate bond, she could feel Kieran's grim determination as he prepared for the storm that was about to break over them. "They're coming," she said softly, not needing to specify who. Around her, the beasts stirred restlessly, ancient instincts recognizing the approach of those who meant harm to their chosen rulers. Kieran's hand tightened on hers, their fingers interlaced in a grip that felt like an anchor in the chaos gathering above. "Let them come," he said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone born to face down rebellions. "It's time they learned what happens when they threaten what belongs to me." The first wave arrived within minutes, a delegation of council members led by Elder Blackwood and Councilman Thorne, their faces set in expressions of barely contained outrage. Beta Marcus followed close behind, his usual composure cracked by the magnitude of what his alpha had chosen to do. "This is madness, Kieran," Marcus said without preamble, his voice echoing off the arena walls as he descended the stone steps. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The Ravencrest Alliance was the only thing keeping the Northern Territories from declaring war on us." "The Alliance was built on a lie," Kieran replied, not moving from Luna's side despite the growing crowd gathering on the arena floor. "I will not mate with a woman I don't love to secure treaties with packs who would abandon us the moment it became convenient." Elder Blackwood stepped forward, his aged face creased with genuine distress. "Love is a luxury kings cannot afford, Your Majesty. Lady Seraphina brings with her the combined military might of 3 packs, resources we desperately need if we're to survive the coming conflicts." "And what does this creature bring?" Councilman Thorne's voice dripped with disdain as he gestured toward Luna. "A handful of beasts and wild claims about royal bloodlines. You would trade the security of thousands for the fantasy of one disturbed servant." The reaction from Luna's court was immediate and terrifying. Night Whisper's growl started low and built to a roar that shook dust from the ancient rafters. The fire drake's scales began to glow cherry red as heat radiated from its massive form. The iron bear reared to its full height, metallic claws scraping against stone in a sound like death itself approaching. But it was Luna who silenced them all. Power exploded from her like a shockwave, golden light washing over every surface in the arena as her wolf surged upward with protective fury. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in the bones of everyone present, the voice of a queen who would not tolerate insults to her mate or her reign. "Choose your words carefully," she said, the temperature in the arena dropping several degrees as supernatural cold radiated from her position. "You stand in the presence of the last daughter of the Moon Whisper bloodline, surrounded by guardians who have waited centuries for my return. I am not some disturbed servant playing at being important. I am exactly what I was born to be." Councilman Thorne opened his mouth to respond, but whatever words he intended died in his throat as every beast in the arena turned toward him with expressions of lethal intent. The message was clear. One more insult, and the council would discover exactly what Luna brought to this union. "The bloodline claims are convenient but unproven," Elder Blackwood said carefully, his politician's instincts recognizing the very real danger in the air. "Even if true, they change nothing about our political reality. The Northern Territories will not accept a servant as their queen, no matter what ancient title she might claim." "Then they will learn to accept it," Kieran said, his voice carrying the steel that had made him the most feared alpha in living memory. "Because I will not be swayed by threats or political pressure. Luna is my mate, chosen by forces older than your political alliances, and I will defend that bond against anyone foolish enough to challenge it." Luna felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words, the fierce protective love flowing through the mate bond like liquid starlight. But even as her heart soared, her practical mind recognized the very real dangers they were facing. "They're right about one thing," she said quietly, her words audible to everyone in the suddenly silent arena. "There will be war. Packs who were counting on that alliance will see this as betrayal, and they'll use it as an excuse to attack." "Let them come." Kieran's smile was sharp as winter wind. "They seem to forget that I've never lost a battle, and that was before I had a mate whose power calls to every wild creature within 100 miles. As if summoned by his words, a new sound echoed through the arena, the distant howl of wolves somewhere far above. Not the tame, civilized sounds of pack members in their human forms, but the wild, primal calls of creatures answering an ancient summons. Luna felt her power pulse outward, reaching beyond the confines of the compound to touch the minds of every beast that roamed the surrounding forests. "What is that?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with growing alarm as more howls joined the first, creating a symphony of wildness that seemed to come from every direction at once. Luna exchanged a look with Kieran, seeing her own understanding reflected in his storm-grey eyes. "That," she said with quiet satisfaction, "is my army answering the call of their queen." The realization hit the council members like a physical blow. Luna was not just claiming the loyalty of the beasts in the arena. She was calling to every wild creature for miles around, and they were responding with the enthusiasm of subjects who had found their rightful ruler. "This is unnatural," Thorne breathed, backing away from Luna as if she were some kind of plague carrier. "No one person should have that kind of power over wild beasts. It's an abomination." "It's evolution," Luna corrected, rising to her feet with fluid grace as power continued to radiate from her like heat from a forge. "Your kind has forgotten what it means to live in harmony with the wild. You've built walls between yourselves and the natural world, convinced yourselves that dominance is the only form of strength. But there are older ways, deeper bonds, connections that don't require submission or fear." Around her, the beast began to move, not with the restless agitation of caged animals, but with the purposeful coordination of a royal guard taking positions. Night Whisper moved to Luna's right side, the fire drake to her left, the iron bear directly behind her like a mountain of living metal. Smaller creatures, wolves and wildcats and great ravens, arranged themselves in a protective formation that spoke of ancient protocols and time-honoured traditions. "You want to know what I bring to this union?" Luna asked, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the arena. "I bring the loyalty of every wild thing that remembers the old ways. I bring the power to heal the rift between civilization and wilderness. I bring balance to a world that has forgotten how to live in harmony with itself." The howling above grew louder, closer, as more creatures answered her call. Luna could feel them converging on the compound from every direction. Wolves and bears, great cats and soaring eagles, even smaller creatures like foxes and owls, adding their voices to the growing chorus. They were not coming as invaders, but as subjects greeting their rightful queen, ready to defend her against any who would seek to harm her. "My God!" Elder Blackwood whispered, his face pale with dawning understanding. "She's calling them all, every wild creature in the territory." "And they're answering," Kieran added with fierce pride, his arms sliding around Luna's waist in a gesture of both protection and possession. "Still think she brings nothing to this alliance?" But even as Luna revelled in the display of her awakening power, she could see the fear growing in the eyes of the pack members who surrounded them. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of a queen whose authority came not from politics, but from something far older and more dangerous. "This only proves our point," Marcus said, though his voice shook with barely controlled terror. "She's too powerful, too unpredictable. A queen who can command wild beasts could turn them against the pack itself if she chose to." "I would never," Luna began, but Kieran's hand on her arm stopped her. "Don't defend yourself to them," he said quietly, his storm-grey eyes holding hers with steady certainty. "Queens don't explain their power to those who fear it. They simply prove why that power exists." Luna felt the truth of his words settle into her bones like a key turning in a lock. She was not the servant girl who had to justify her existence to others. She was a queen whose very presence was reshaping the world around her, whether that world was ready for the change or not. The howling reached its crescendo as the first of the wild creatures began to appear at the arena's entrances, their eyes glowing with reflected light as they looked upon their chosen queen. Luna stood surrounded by her court of ancient guardians, her mate's arm around her waist, and felt destiny settling around them like armour made of starlight and inevitability. "The old world is ending," she said, her voice carrying prophetic certainty. "A new one is being born. You can be part of that rebirth, or you can be swept away by it, but you cannot stop it." As wild howls echoed through the compound and fear scent filled the air, Luna knew that the true battle for their future was about to begin. But for the first time in her life, she was not afraid of the fight. She was ready for it.